gas drilling in the area, mentioned vapor recovery systems being, which I think he said, used in certain cases where it's necessary. They should be required on all wells. It's been shown that they can reduce up to 90% of emissions. Those emissions vary from minute by minute. When you talk to regulators that go out, one day they show up, there's emissions at the well, other days there's not. So how do you determine when it's necessary? It should be necessary all the time for the people living next to those wells. And if you don't think that's the case, you're saying that those people are expendable. And what happens when we say those people are expendable, if you remember people like the Parr family in Wise County, and if anybody read the Wise County Journal on September 23rd of 2010, they would have read a really sad story about a family that over a long period of time was sickened without even knowing why. And then finally their doctor said, there's something going on here that's environmental. And it wasn't even like that was their first suspicion. And they had their house tested, and drilling chemicals in their daughter's room reached asphyxiation levels. That is horrifying. And I find it callous for somebody from the industry. I respect his right to comment, but I find it callous to say that you're doing enough with stories like that out there and the devastation that's being visited upon families living next to these wells. And I think that goes to another issue of how all these regulations are being, it's becoming the city's issue, responsibility to have to regulate, but the federal government and the state governments aren't regulating. And so it comes down to the city ordinances that are a lot of times determined without any input from scientific experts, medical experts, and without citizen input. It's what on in Dallas and sign leases without any citizen input. And yet, obviously, there's enough of a public health issue for them to deny their first drilling permit if they've already agreed to these leases. And that's a pretty unsettling set of circumstances. But with what's happening on the city ordinance level, you've got all these differing rules. Some cities, like Fort Worth, allow 600 feet buffer zone between the wells and residents. Dallas is considering as close as 300, or that's actually what's in the ordinance is 300 feet, which is frightening. And
including sense.
Let's see. I would just like to say that the issues that are before us are multi-level water, air pollution. You've got the SMU study showing that air pollution is equivalent to all the cars on the road. We have the data showing this. So, it's time that our representatives please start regulating this. Thank you.
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry. Well, first of all, I want to thank you and congratulate you for your victory in Dallas. Secondly, I want to observe that I believe fracking water will eventually be regulated, or the chemicals that go into the fracking process. Unfortunately, it's going to take a certain die rate. It's going to take a certain amount of disasters. It's going to take a certain amount of losses before that happens. But it's only going to happen because of the good and hard work of citizens like you, because there's too many people in elected office that have a vested interest in not understanding what's going on. So just keep up the work.
What are you doing in regards to the Exide plant in Frisco? When we get more details on lead exposure, you may have heard about how people are getting their blood tested about lead exposure. Any comments on that?
I'm not familiar with it.
I've read this a little bit. At this point, the committee I chair is not involved in the issue yet. That is, we won't get there in short order because our main function is a regulatory capacity. So I suspect there'll be more that makes its way into our committee staff for review between now and the time the legislature commences in early January.
Okay, that's an important issue, lead exposure. Marian Thompson writes, how can the public initiate air and water quality controls on shale drilling and fracking operations?
Well, if I'm understanding the question, things like tonight, it's you have to big business can be molded into a relationship that's beneficial for the business community as well as for citizens at large. I mean, there are many examples of state government where that's been effectively done over the years, but it takes great tenacity to do it. I mean, I wish I could tell you there was an easy route. There's not. But in the end, and you're seeing it happen right now, regardless of your political views, you're seeing an outpouring of concern on the country because people have differences of opinion about the direction of the country. I use that only as an anecdote to say the same thing applies here. If you are outspoken enough in large enough numbers and on a repetitive basis, you absolutely can impact and change direction of public policy. It's not easy. You'll have more setbacks than you will gains at times, but that's how we come about developing responsible public policy. You know, when issues like this are relatively new to the political scene, this issue of gas drilling and the fracking process and everything is certainly new to this community and to all of us. Unfortunately, there's a learning process. And then there's a process before, you'll have some people that understand immediately and catch on for one reason or another. But getting to the people in the middle and perhaps even to the people on the opposite end of the spectrum, it takes time, it takes factual evidence, and it takes your willingness to be outspoken. This young lady who spoke a moment ago is a good example. I know you said you were very uncomfortable speaking, but you did a great job. You conveyed your point, you were clear, concise. It's easier said than done, but most people are nervous when they get up in these forums and speak, but you just have to remember that, we're just a bunch of goofballs up here, and you're not going to say a thing in the world that we would consider silly, because those of us in the legislature, at least,
more than one.
We can take care of that ourselves. So we can take comments, and it's very helpful.
Dr. Lawrence Cottle, followed by John Ross.
So you speak for itself.
Indeed.
Dr. Lawrence Cottle is no longer in the room. Okay, John?
Thanks, gentlemen, and leading women voters. I appreciate the chance to talk to you. It was about 10 years ago that one of my first assignments as an environmental activist was to go to the TNRCC Sunset Review Committee meeting. I guess I'm sad to say that we're talking about the same kind of things here. So my challenge to you is let's give it another shot and hit it a little bit harder. If it's possible through this process, there's a couple specifics that I'd like to see emphasized with the TCEQ. We've talked about the cumulative effects of pollution. I would like to emphasize that our water needs to be cleaner, not we need the lower standards, which is happening with some of the total maximum daily limit things that I've been following recently. Reinforce and fine heavily can't be emphasized enough. And the water that we need has to be evaluated for not only human consumption, but for pollution purposes and for wildlife and for employment, like the shrimpers down in the Gulf. So if that's possible through this process to emphasize those things with those folks, I'd appreciate it. As far as waste, I did have an assignment that was to follow the nuclear industry that's happening here. We've got to close the compact loophole. Please emphasize that. I hate the fact that the public is going to have to insure those facilities if something goes wrong, because it's going to fall to us, not to the companies. And as far as the e-waste, I'd love to see some renewed emphasis on that, as well as effective coal waste taken care of. As far as the Railroad Commission, nobody's brought it up, but do you think it's possible to consider following Governor Perry's lead, because he's always talking about excessive spending in Washington and excessive bureaucracy? Do you think we can fold that agency and maybe take some of the more important functions that it's supposed to do and put it in other agencies that work better and save ourselves a bunch of money?
Right now, there are 3 Republicans who serve on that agency, all appointees, well, not appointees, I'm sorry, they're elected. But I actually favor doing that as well. That's a piece of legislation I intend to support this session. Railroad Commission's job could be done more efficiently by taking those primary duties and putting them in other agencies. And I, for one, and I would say this whether these were Republican or Democrats holding the position, it has largely over time, among other things, turned into a training ground for people seeking higher office. And I resent that. I think that's not what public service ought to be about. And so I'd like to see it folded up. Paul Burka, interestingly, recently listed a number of recommendations in his blog for a more efficient state government. And one of the things he recommended as well is that very thing.
Well, thank you very much. You got my support on that.
I'd like to thank our timekeeper, our distinguished president of the Arlington area, Glenn Voters, Tony Presley. We probably have a way of quite noticeable way of being the opportunity handy. So I'm glad everyone had an opportunity to speak. I thank our panel for hanging in there to this hour of the evening to listen to everyone. Thank you for being here. And now I'll call on Rita to give us our wrap up and future sunset anticipation.
She did a great job moderating, didn't she? And I always feel like there should be a prize for the citizens that sit for EPA hearings or town halls or whatever. And I think a requirement of a legislature is, or a councilman, how long can you sit within a 24-hour period and not move and go? But anyway, we appreciate you coming tonight. We're glad we could get to everyone. Don't forget there's handouts outside, there's postcards to sign. We are going to try and organize something for folks that want to go down to testify at the Capitol on the 15th and 16th. It's time to start talking to those other legislators before they hit the door of the Capitol, because all the lobbyists just flop like vultures. No, we good ones.
Right.
But anyway, go out there and start talking to others that don't connect, that what happens at the state, that old saying, all politics are local, is absolutely true. And for more information, you can go to acttaxes.org. I hope you all have a great evening. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you so much. And don't forget that hearing that Mr. Burton talked about on the 18th and forward.
Thank you for the explanation.
I think they counted the vision.
Well, that was what was the scary thing up there.
You're going to make it look like I did. No, that was cute. You can send it to me and I can get it. I will get that to you. I'm going to